This is a TalkStation original podcast.
On this week's episode of the Paperboys podcast, JJ and I interview East Carteret alum Corey Patton. We talk about his role as CEO of Pramana Labs and his business's groundbreaking use of AI in sports. It all starts right now on the Paperboys podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Paperboys podcast. I'm JJ Smith.
And I'm Zack Nally.
We're reporters with the Carteret County News-Times. We are joined this week by co-founder and CEO Corey Patton of Pramana Labs. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, great to be here. Excited to talk to you two today.
So Corey and I go back just about a minute. We went to high school together. He, like me, is an East Carteret grad and proud of it. And,
Proud Mariner.
Maybe not. And so, yeah, Corey was a couple years behind me. His sister was in my grade, and we were tight back then and still tight to this day. Love that, Christy Patton. And so, yeah, me and Corey have known each other for a while. No stories about high school days today, though. So Corey has had
No, we're gonna start professionally, JJ.
Yeah, no high school stories. The only thing Corey could tell you about me in high school was I was somehow an even bigger dork then than I am now, and I know that's hard to believe. So that's about as much as you need to know about that. So Corey has taken Corey has taken a circuitous path to his role today with Pramana Labs, and we'll get deep into that backstory and Corey's travels to where he is now. But let's start off with Pramana Labs. Just tell us, Corey, right off the bat. You've got the floor for the next 45 minutes. What is it?
Oh, man. So Pramana Labs, first of all, I appreciate you guys having me on today. I appreciate the setup, JJ. Yeah, we go back a long, long time.
Yeah, if you'd have told me in high school that decades later I would be hosting a podcast interviewing Corey Patton, that would be hard to believe.
Yeah. I think if you'd have told somebody you were hosting something called a podcast back in the 90s, Carter, people would have said, wait, what?
That's a good point.
You don't need to be telling people how far we go back, so yeah.
Did
they have cell phones in your day? I don't know. I'm
no cell
history
phones.
Buff here.
No internet, no anything.
No, we were on our own.
We were feral.
County at that point in time.
Yeah. And now Corey's doing AI stuff, so that's how far he's come.
Yeah, that wasn't on the menu back then either. So,
yeah.
All right, so let's start with Pramana Labs here. Look, I started Pramana Labs with a co-founder, Chet Patel, about 5 years ago. But what Pramana Labs does is we saw a real need half-decade ago for people, especially in the sports industry, because we'll get into my past there, but especially in the sports industry, to be able to just ask the question they want, that they're looking for in the middle of gameplay, to be able to say, has this ever happened before? When was the last time this event happened? Who has the longest streak of this? When have I seen this before? And really that type of information was being kept and kind of dominated by an engineering set of folks at the league level or at the team level, and it was not easy to get access to. And sometimes broadcasters in the time that they need it when something happens want a reference. And what we did with Pramana Labs is facilitate the ability to actually ask that question in just simple natural language, as simple as you were Googling it or texting it. And it's an application that sits on top of huge data sets and allows that capability. And so that we saw that as the only way to really be able to get deep conversational statistical information on demand instantly. And we created this facility, this ability to do this with the Pramana Labs technology that immediately became into play at the NHL and a couple other sports areas and arenas and leagues. But the NHL was our first client, and so when you watch an NHL game, Pramana Labs facilitates that stats interaction that you see on screen or in the conversation with the broadcasting target. So I can get into how it works, but that's the basis of why we created Pramana Labs, and we've since kind of expanded it into a bunch of other verticals and areas of interest. But if you can ask it a question, you can get an answer, and it's accurate and on demand to be able to communicate. So that's the basis of it. That's why we saw it and why we started the company. And from there, it's kind of only grown into other areas and other use cases. But that's the basis of it, JJ. And if you'd have told me back in East Carteret, when we all watch sports and love sports, that there would be some way that I would be able to facilitate the ability to ask that question we all wanted to know when we were watching a game, it was not something on the menu then either.
Yeah.
Boy, that's incredible. And you're right. There are some databases of information out there that are, specific to teams, specific to leagues, but they're not connected. A lot of people say that, the internet connected all these entities, but not really. It's just a big database. So you have to kind of get lucky and chance upon that information by going to a specific website or this or that. But the ability to find that information quickly by connecting all those sources, man, that's just incredible.
Yeah, and what we did, again, was when we first started working with, and I'll give you an example with the league, with the NHL, they have an engineering department in New York. They had pulled their data into a historical database of over 100-plus years that they really were having trouble keeping up with the demand for information from that. And the only way they were doing it was with a group of engineers in New York City that were having to write SQL code, of which I could explain if you want, but that gets really laborious, and there's always context around it that wasn't quite there for the stats and information team in Toronto to be able to disseminate to their rights holders, their front offices, the broadcasters, the media targets that they had in their roster. And we connected those two groups with this software that sits on top of that database and allows them to be able to communicate with each other just through natural language. And the instant access to it kind of revolutionized the speed, the time savings, and the customer reporting to get those out to the people that needed that at the time they needed it. And so when you talk about that for sports, it's great. When you talk about that for retail, it's a really good thing for marketing and for merchandising to be able to communicate between the IT analyst side of the house and the actual business users of the house who don't know anything about code. And that's really where we sit, is in the middle of it, to allow everybody with every level of ability to ask the questions they need at the time they need them in a business environment.
Well, in terms of establishing the relationships with these folks, was that a challenge at all? I mean, some of this is not necessarily proprietary information, but certainly stuff that maybe they're not rushing to get out there or to do themselves. Was that a challenge at all for Pramana Labs?
Well, I have to go back a little bit on this one too. So, and we feel like we're working backwards on this circuitous resume, if you will. But I was, before Pramana Labs, myself, my co-founder, and several employees were at Intel. And at Intel, I had forged a relationship with the National Hockey League folks, some of the folks that were, in the technology area, the CTOs and some of the SVPs. And a lot of that was forged on the golf course, because it all comes down to getting 4 hours where the phones are in the bag, right? You have communication over 4 hours where you talk deeply about things, you understand the person, you learn, you build a personal relationship with it. So when we started Pramana Labs, I already had the relationship with the NHL to get that type of trust involved, that they would say, we can see this solution benefiting us, and we will believe in a company that is just starting out to be able to provide this critical piece of the puzzle, right? So those relationships became very, very important to have been built, mostly, again, playing a sport while talking about a sport and understanding and trusting each other. So that's kind of how those things come around a lot of ways.
And you guys were at Saffron, is that right?
We're going backwards again, one hop further. So yes, before Intel, we were at a company called Saffron Technologies, which was at that point an AI company in the natural language space, somewhat similar to what we do at Pramana, but very, very different at a root level. But at that point in time, we were there for several years. We got acquired by Intel, and that's where the whole idea of natural language grew from what we saw then, which nobody even knew what that was, to the ChatGPTs, the OpenAIs, the co-pilots that you see today in the natural language space. So, yeah, that's the baseline of where the whole tech arc of my career started, was at Saffron about a decade and a half ago.
And some of the stories I've read about your company, Corey, you've talked about a lot about the two-way conversation with data that you all wanted to create, and maybe expand on that a little bit about what exactly you mean by that.
Yeah. Look, I know people think things are just marketing slang when you hear stuff like that. And I know it sounds catchy and all that, but it really was the whole idea. The idea of this was, JJ, when you and I used to talk sports, or when we still talk sports about the game, you watch a game, we talk about what happened, there's always a follow-up question involved. Meaning, when you see something and you say, okay, we can use hockey because it's right in front of me here every day. Sebastian Aho of the Hurricanes, has a point in 3 consecutive periods in the playoffs, okay? Your question will be like, hey, who else has done that? Okay, now you have that question. You need to ask that. Who else in NHL history has ever had a point in 3 consecutive periods in the playoffs, right? But then your follow-up's going to be, okay, well, has a Hurricane ever done that? Has anybody had 4 periods, 5 periods? Like, all that stuff is kind of where you have these follow-up questions. And so what we tried to do with the two-way conversation aspect of our tool is we run through all of these combinations of questions each night on the back end of the tool, and it creates these sentences, these paragraphs about important nuggets that we call stat lines that set up the game, that set up the context, that allow you to not have to ask even those questions, so that when an event occurs, you already know. It's already there in front of you. It's filtered by the game. It's set up for the teams and the leagues and for their rights holders to be able to know, here's some things that might happen tonight, and if they do, here's the context around it. And then you can go in, click in on that stat line, and ask all the follow-up questions that involve the context around it, the league, the team, the period, anything about it that creates that informative two-way conversation, because the data is both being pushed to you in a way that you can digest, and it allows you to then ask that other question of it through an application framework on a computer screen, which is really kind of the holy grail that you and I as sports folks have looked for years and years and years, to be able to kind of self-serve all the context around an event that we see occurring in live play.
How do you mine all this data?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. So what we do is the system is set up basically attaching to a data set or data sets, as many as you want. And that data is usually owned by the customer that we have the relationship with, right? So the data doesn't move, there's data security, there's governance, all that stuff that people really get kind of concerned about when you have proprietary data that we use. And some of it's proprietary, some of it's not, depending on the customer that we engage with. But the way that we actually mine it, as you say, is that we set up things called search experiences within our application, meaning there is a context and business logic built into a complex SQL statement, if you will, that has a parameter for making that SQL statement completely interchangeable to solve millions of combinations of that question. Okay, every team is just a parameter in the data, and every period is a parameter in the data. Every home, road, country of birth. Anything you can imagine is a parameter in the data that the system then executes against. And if there's new data, or if there is some sort of a rank or a list change within a ranking, it automatically writes new data, writes a new stat line, and then pushes that into the program. So that's how it's kind of doing the whole system. But what that really benefits is it allows deep custom logic, which only the domain experts, say the folks at the NHL in their engineering department, or the folks at Equibase in their horse racing department, that know that there are certain ways they calculate streaks, or whether there's some data gaps, or whether this metric was only kept between these years, or whether they only started keeping track of shots against in a certain year. That stuff's all in the system, so that our system then knows, here's where the calculations begin, here's how we calculate personal versus team. All that stuff is then built into the tool, so that you know when the output hits that it's accurate and you can trust it, and it can be sent along without having to verify. So that's kind of the basis of the system, and it's what keeps us from not having any of the, quote, hallucinations that you hear about a lot in generative AI today.
Yeah, and a lot of what you just said went right over JJ and I's head. And some of what you said sounds a lot like like a super juiced up SEO type. But obviously the AI side of things, it's all relatively new. Is this something, what you all are doing, was this possible 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or is this all really relatively new technology or way to use it?
Look. This is all relatively new. A lot of it is actually we created, okay? The way the system is architected was our Pramana secret sauce, okay? So I would say when we started 5 years ago, a lot of what's in the tool, there was a kernel of it when we started that we built, but then it has expanded rapidly, right? So I would say a decade ago, this was not available. This was not something that could have been done. I think there's been a lot of improvements in the way that we architect the solution that probably couldn't have been done 5 years ago, and it just keeps getting better and better. Now, the generative AI piece of it is a relatively new area, and that's kind of your large language model stuff, which is essentially what ChatGPT is. Okay, it's taking words and it's saying what it's been trained over a huge corpus of data from the internet. What's the next likely word to be put in the line of that sentence, using attention and self-attention, things that are going to put the users or the listeners to sleep right now. I'll skip over that, but it's a really complex way of saying create something out of a question that's being asked and then give it back to me. What we do on our system is we leverage some of that in ways that are behind a framework that keeps that LLM from actually just making up stuff. It uses data that has been verified and accurate to then create the actual language around it. So that part was not at all available 5 years ago, wasn't available 2 years ago. So when you look at the system, we're additive, but altogether what we have today was not available, even 3 years ago. So we keep up with the engineering trends while still having our secret sauce built into the back end.
Sure. And again, coming at this from a layman's perspective, one of the things that fascinates me about AI, and I've been using ChatGPT since it was available to the public in November of I guess it was 2 years ago now, or something like that. And it learns on its own. It's not just simply typing in code and having data come back at you. It is continuously improving itself. What's the I mean, right now, obviously, your focus with your company is the end user experience. What is the next step for a technology like this in a way that could further the sports conversation?
Yeah, well, it's content. I mean, as they say, content is king.
Sure.
And when you have so many viewers, whether it be a streaming, whether it be an actual broadcast, whether it be internet, whether it be any sort of a medium where fans are engaging with sports, a second screen, betting, gambling, sports writing, sports gambling, all of that needs content. And that means folks have to obviously generate that content, which is very, very important. But I think some of these actual technologies can help. They're never going to replace the human, because some of the context, the humor, the intelligence around it is just not inherent with a tool that is just a word predictor, is what these technologies are doing. Some of the things that they can do that really benefit, I think, for this in the sports realm, is that they do what's called text to SQL. And it's just from learning what is on the internet and then creating, okay, here's how we think this type of code can answer this question that's being asked against a particular data set. That's fine, but even the best systems there are, 86, 85% accurate, and that's just not good enough for some to actually have faith in. So that will get better and better and better, and that problem may eventually be close to solved. And I think the output of it in content in just prose form will get better and better. It'll sound a little bit more like a human wrote it, but I don't think there's any shortcut there. So I think what it'll do will make simple tasks pretty easy, and some simple context or conversation about a game will be automated. But I just think that there's still a long way to go before you can completely remove the human in the loop from these technologies.
And one of the things you've been talking about, Corey, is the data that any sports fan wants to know. Just basic stats or sabermetric stats or advanced analytics or whatever you want to talk about. But that's from the stat side of it. But also with the NHL, you're dealing with. They have the puck technology now. They have the player tracking technology, just like in every sport. All these athletes now are wearing these vests that, break down everything you could want from, performance. How are you all working with that side?
Yeah, so we're just starting to get that stuff into the tool. It's really the puck and player tracking stuff you're speaking of, or if you're looking at, with the NFL, you saw the Sony Hawkeye partnership that was announced 2 days ago. Every league is looking to involve tracking technology in ways that they can either have better broadcast for the fans, and they can communicate the speed and the placement and where folks are on the ice. There is a interesting data point with the NHL in that it is a free-flowing game. Okay, meaning you don't have the benefit of having a play start and stop like you do in football. It's a little bit different. In order to tell stories, what they've decided at the league level, and obviously a lot of this is league internal communications, we're not going to talk about it, but they've decided that you can tell a really good story about a game like hockey, which is so fast and so comprehensive, and they're moving in ways on the ice that it's really hard to see from a television broadcast, that they can provide fans using the puck and the player tracking in various angles of overlays to be able to show how this player was moving, how fast they were moving, where their angle of attack came in, the shot angle of it, the goalie depth, on that angle, the shooting percentage. All of those things can be calculated based upon having a tail of this puck and player tracking data that can then be analyzed to discuss things like shot opportunity analysis and goal scoring percentage from certain areas, or goaltender save accuracy in certain areas that were just unavailable before this technology was there. So you can just tell better stories. You can actually do health benefits to it and safety analysis. All those things are really important when it comes to sports and this tracking technology. It's more than just for the fans and the viewers. It's for the teams to analyze all the player performance that you can only capture from XYZ coordinate data. So we're starting to work with them about being able to do some of the analysis on it in our tool, but it's not part of our core offering just yet.
You guys are at Saffron. You're the company's director of marketing there. Is that correct?
Yeah. We're going backwards on this. We'll go back. I was their director of marketing. I came from another company as a marketing director. It was a sports company at that point in time, and the CEO of Saffron, kind of a random thing. Actually, I met her through my sister, who actually cut her hair. These network connections happen occasionally, right? So she took a liking to me, and she took a liking to my voice, and said, "Hey, we're doing some videos over at Saffron. I'd love it if you came over, and did some voiceover on our video." And I said, "Well, that'll be interesting." And so that's how the conversation started. From there, at that exact same time, Saffron was getting a Series B round of funding from Intel. And she said, "You know what? I actually am looking for somebody to run marketing, and I think you're great at video production, and you could help us round out some of our offerings there." And so I jumped into that role. and from there, within a couple years, Intel bought us. And so going from sports video production and marketing at one aspect into the marketing director for a straight-up AI tech company to then driving an acquisition was, again, not something I saw coming down the road at all. And it all started with just an introduction to someone in my sister's salon. So you never know where you're going to meet people that change your career trajectory.
Shout out to Vince Salon in Durham, North Carolina.
That's it. Vince Salon, Durham, North Carolina, Hope Valley Shopping Center. Look it up. And they apparently help careers. So there you go.
There you go. And what was Chet's role there?
Yeah, Chet was an engineering director there as well. So he wrote most of the code base from the Saffron tech that got us acquired at Intel. I mean, just a brilliant engineer, along with a couple of folks, Manny Aparicio and Jim Fleming, who started it. And then Gail Shepard was the actual CEO. And those three brain trusts were the heart and soul. And Chet was kind of part and parcel to it from the very beginning. So he had just this long tail of experience in AI and natural language that is just unsurpassed by folks that I've ever met. And so he was a natural partner to go found this company with and lead all of the tech and the innovation that we have since put into our company, our product, and our future roadmap. So he was just an integral part, and I've known him forever, and also just a genuinely great guy.
And as you said, you guys are acquired by Intel, and so you're working for Intel. And then my favorite stories are always the origin stories. You guys are working together, and you're having lunch, or you're having dinner, or you're just during the day at work, and you're like looking at each other and like, what we could do something on our own here. We could do something different, something special.
Yeah, no, we had those conversations all the time, and a lot of them involved maybe some beers after work, but the conversations were always around, okay, I have my job. His job was to lead engineering teams inside Intel, doing things like, suspicious activity reports for banking and targets like that. And he's a huge sports fan, so was I. My job was to be the director of sports development, meaning go to teams and leagues that were in my network, and start to pitch the use cases of natural language in their environment. And we're talking 2017, 16, 17, 15, 16, 17. It was nascent, right? PASPA was even still the law of the land. So there was no sports gambling, sports wagering to talk about at all.
Oh, wow.
But when I started doing that, we started working with the Pittsburgh Pirates. We're an interesting client through Intel. And their use case was actually around scouting and doing a bunch of analysis on scouting reports in natural language and trying to do better selection based on the language. And this was my idea that I pitched to them, and they ended up buying it and getting a license with us. Could we analyze potential players in the baseball draft through just the words their scouts have been saying for the last 15 years? Because when you are connected to what you're seeing, you're then writing. And you two, being sports reporters, understand that when you see something, you write it differently. And sometimes there is a tail that you put down that may be the way you describe a right-handed pitcher's, slider that you've only written 3 other times about with somebody. And therefore, we need to be able to find a way to say, is this person potentially different than the rest of these 10,000 kids you've looked at? Because when you've mentioned this type of arm-side ride on this high school right-hander, and you're the same scout, there might be something that's special. So we sold that idea in natural language to the Pirates, started working with them consistently, started working with the NHL on some ideas that were in the room. And then we started thinking to ourselves, maybe there's a way we could kind of create some of this stuff in a different fashion. And in 2018, Intel decided that they were our business unit they were going to kind of transfer people out of and move along. And Chet and I said, okay, now's the time. So we left Intel and started Pramana. And we immediately got the Pirates contract. We got the NHL in a different contract, and we moved on. And that's where the whole company started. Was there were already discussions underway once Intel decided they did not want those contracts anymore, and we decided we wanted to build something that we thought was a completely different way, a different architecture, and our own way to address the problems that we had started discussing.
How scary is that to branch out on your own the way y'all did?
Startups are not for the faint of heart. Startups, I like to say startups don't just involve you, they involve your whole family. They involve the whole family of every employee that takes a leap and says, yeah, I'll come along with you for the ride. And so it was definitely scary. Luckily, we had supportive spouses that were along for the ride with us. We had a couple of folks that were initially interested that said, yeah, we'll join you and take this challenge and go. And you never forget those people that started it with you and believed in what you're doing from the very beginning, right? So not an easy decision to leave steady paychecks and corporate company and then start a startup. But look, you can't look back once you do it. And we've been pretty thrilled with the decision.
And started with how many people, and what are you all up to now?
Yeah, it was, obviously Chet and I started it ourselves and then brought on our VP of Ops from Intel and our initial engineer from Intel. So it started with 4 people. We've grown to 12. And it's, we could use more, to be honest. So that's kind of the way it all started was even on a whiteboard in my a second floor of my house here in Durham. And there's still I created some whiteboard walls and created our first office. And some of the actual, I don't think I let it cure long enough. Some of the initial actual architecture drawings you can still see faintly in the whiteboard wall. But then we moved to obviously our own official office, and kind of we grew out of that and became the company we are. And
did you have an official office in the Triangle area?
Yeah, we did. We started a pretty nice office in the Triangle the month before COVID hit was when we opened. So that was a good use of funds for the next year and a half, 2 years. So yeah. And then we eventually actually went fully remote about a year ago, because it just seemed to be kind of the way that the industry was moving in tech was folks were starting to say, look, we got used to the cadence at home. There's productivity advantages to still being able to work at 6, 7 o'clock at night rather than commuting 2 hours in a car. And so we ended up full-time remote. So now we actually do not have a home office. Everybody works remotely, and then we gather together in co-working spaces when we need to.
The world we live in.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, well, how did Intel feel about you all, headed out of town and taking the NHL and the Pirates with you?
As I said, the only way we did is they just discontinued the contracts. They had no interest in them. So At that point, when they just did not have an interest in that, they actually were moving in another direction with a lot of their. I guess they were going back more into the silicon development than the AI world, and so at that point, that just became. It was clear there was no issue with that at all. So there was no fight on that. And our technology is not leveraging anything at all from Intel. So there's no conflict there at all. We created our own architecture and our own pathway forward.
And so you're working with those two industries, and then you started a collaboration with Equibase, which is the industry standard horse racing database. How did that come about, and what are y'all doing with them?
Oh, man, we can even go back further into the career about horse racing and owning horses and being involved in that entire California racing scene with me. And it's always been kind of a love of mine that I picked up while out there living in California, and I'm sure we'll get to that part. But I obviously looked at that and having a deep knowledge in the industry said, look, there's almost no industry with more data, okay? Because you have, dozens and dozens of tracks running every single day and, 8 to 10 races a day at each track and 10 horses in every race. And you can do the math, and that every horse has a massive running line. And if you've ever looked at a past performance, they look like hieroglyphics to most people, right? But to me, it is a puzzle to solve. And I said, maybe we can use access like natural language to communicate really complicated data to the masses, to the fans that are both experienced and novice, to try to give them a leg up on horse racing for every race that they might be attending or looking at. And so Equibase became an interesting target through a advisor of ours who had a deep, long connection with the head of the Jockey Club, president of the Jockey Club, which owns Equibase, and that's where the conversation started. I showed them the tool, I showed them the applicability, how this might actually sit on top of their data and be able to be asked deep, complex questions about horse racing, tracks, trainers, jockeys, combinations, distance, surface, anything, you name it, and then create those stat lines I mentioned, the automated nuggets of data for every race, and give insights on winning percentages, combination percentages, trainer condition changes, things that are impossible unless you have every past performance of every horse that's ever run to be able to calculate on your own, and nobody has that. So we have access to data and communicate it in ways that fans can understand for every race at every track every single day in simple natural language. So I think that is a really big benefit for folks out there playing. And I do podcasts with them a lot. I'll do, we'll do pushes together about the stat lines. They're starting to really get a consistent following across the industry. So I'm really proud of that one, and it's obviously something that's close to my heart too.
Is there any other sports industries you all are looking to expand to?
Oh yeah, we've met with all the sports. We've met with everything from motorsports to all the big fours. They're all in their different, level of data maturity, if you will, and how they want to access their information. Obviously, they have relationships with their own internal stats departments. They have relationships with third parties like Elias that serve some of these types of information for them. But we have, at this point, we don't have any of them under contract. So, but we've definitely met with all of them, and we have relationships with all the other major sports leagues.
And forgive me, I may be misunderstanding here, but it feels like Pramana Labs, what they're able to do is, with your technology, is you're able to not only provide a source of information for people looking to further the conversation around sports, but you mentioned things like puck tracking, certain things on the court that, or on the rink or wherever, that other teams or opponents may be able to look at, almost like a souped up film study. Is that right?
Well, we don't do the film part. It's just
the
language part.
But the data itself.
The data part, right? Yeah. And again, this is all, there's a lot of, we're just the access point, right? And there is some setup work that has to be done by folks that have access to that data. This product is not available to the consumers. This is a B2B relationship.
Okay.
For instance, the NHL owns the contract, owns the software. They provide the access point themselves to those that would actually use it, right? The same would be said for MLB or NBA or any of the other leagues. This type of solution would be sold to them, not to the consumer itself. Now, there is a consumer play coming with another data company, but I'm not going to talk about that. I can't. But we are traditionally a B2B company. So the puck and player tracking stuff would be utilized internally and then disseminated by the NHL itself, should that.
Sure, and the B2C part is so interesting to me because a lot of the content we see now is not necessarily generated by the big guys. It's generated by small people with their own podcast or their own whatever means of communication they use to put information out there. And I'm just excited about the idea that maybe AI could help sort of level the playing field between the corporate giants and the startup folks looking to create content that is unique and has a lot of depth.
Yeah, it's really all about data and data rights and data access. I mean, everybody those who own the data own all the access to it, right? And so the sport radars of the world, the geniuses of the world, the individual leagues, the teams, the sports references, like all those folks with a lot of data, they kind of own where that data gets disseminated, how they monetize it, right? And and we're just kind of an access point. We sell to companies to access data that they own to be able to provide this capability. So there are B2B2C interests, but our traditional model is B2B sales, of course.
Is that the biggest difference, Corey, between you all and ChatGPT? Is that the ChatGPT is the publicly available information, and you all are getting it from private companies?
Well, there are obviously different technical stack differences that I don't think anybody on this podcast wants to dive into. But the basis of ChatGPT is that they are mining and accessing data from the internet. Okay, and the context of that could be wrong because we've all seen Facebook, Twitter. We've seen information online that is, I don't know, maybe dubious. And when you ask a question to ChatGPT, and I did this in the room with some folks before, with the actual official data, and asked the same question to ChatGPT and into our Shift product, wildly different answers. So it'll be very excited, and it sounds great, but it's exciting and sounds great and wrong. And sometimes it's right, and sometimes it's not. And if you have to trust ChatGPT to be accurate on a deep, complex sports fact, you're not going to get an answer. So I think that it's just basically saying, okay, we need to be able to put a framework around these types of technologies that make sure it puts a beautiful wording around accurate information. So it's available for folks to ask the same question about, who had the most road power play goals in the 1996 season for the LA Kings. You may or may not get the right answer using ChatGPT, but you will with our tool.
I guess one of the advantages of being strictly B2B is maybe you don't have to focus as much on the user interface as you would the B2C. But like you said, you still have to create, you still have to allow, like you said, the wording to still be translatable to everybody in that particular enterprise.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our user application just has a nice blinking cursor box that says ask a question. So everybody knows how to do that, right? And whether you're at in a business level in the room at a retailer or a pharmaceutical company, you're not going to know sometimes even what a dashboard looks like or how you do filters. This just says ask the question, okay? And so the same type of interface for a consumer would be the same one we use for our current B2B clients, because it just allows access to everybody by simply asking the question. So there will not be much difference between a B2C or a B2B2C engagement with our tool.
And Pramana, how did we come up with that name?
Great question. So Pramana is there are ways in Eastern philosophies of attaining knowledge, and there's 6 of them, and they're called Pramanas. Okay, and it's, written and verbal and things like that. I'm dumbing it down. They're a lot more complex, but loosely translated, it means proof and knowledge of the way. And that's what we wanted to create with our system, is just an engagement point where you can gain knowledge in multiple different ways, the two-way conversation, both in written and visual areas of conveying the knowledge. And so when we decided what we were going to build, I said, look, this is a really interesting way to describe it as a Pramana, proof and knowledge of the way forward in natural language, and that's where Pramana came from.
You all have been named one of the 10 most innovative sports tech companies by Sports Business Journal. Starting to get some love from the outside world there, from journalism. Must feel nice.
Yeah, that was a fun event too. Look, that was up in New York. The SBJ has been great. They've done a bunch of articles about us, and they've been good journalistic ethics, and we like working with them. Okay, but they definitely that was a fun day when they announced their top 10 list, because they had about 3,000 folks that they'd done stories about last year, and to pick us as one of their top 10 was just it's a big moment for us. And there's a SBJ Awards in New York City, which was great. One of our main champions at the NHL won Executive of the Year that night as well. It was a really big night for us, and so it's fun to get that type of coverage, but we don't want to stop there. We want to keep moving and innovate even further, so we continue to be on those lists each year.
Well, speaking of journalism, that's where Corey Patton started.
Yeah.
Made some better career decisions.
He saw the future and said that's not it.
Yeah, J School, UNC Chapel Hill. That was where it all started. I mean, I loved it. I love journalism. I love writing. I love broadcasting. That was the whole idea. Was obviously the love of sports was there, and so I went to Chapel Hill for sports broadcasting in the journalism school, and directly out of that got a job at CNN Sports Illustrated. I did the radio broadcast at Tar Heel Sports Network and WCHL undergrad for all the at that point women's basketball and UNC baseball and any other West Coast games running carts. That's, if anybody's in radio long enough, they know what that was back in the day. But did everything I could to try to keep that up wrote sports writer for various publications, and that's where I thought life was going, right? And you never know where it ends up, right? So CNN Sports Illustrated was an incredible opportunity out of school to still be involved in broadcast journalism, from editing highlights to doing headline sports anchoring, and that was just a really fun arc in life. And then kept the journalism piece going even later in life as a sports writer for a national magazine as well, part-time while I was doing other things, and still miss it occasionally, but I enjoy doing these types of podcasts or writing thought leadership pieces, and still kind of having some hand in the journalistic arena, if you will.
And everybody listening to this under the age of 40 is saying, CNN Sports Illustrated? What's that?
I also did not know what that was. I'd never heard of Sports Illustrated.
Yes. So, okay, well, let's go back and give a little context. This is around the turn of the century. I know it sounds old, right?
Back yonder.
The turn of the century.
Lord.
But yeah, that was a 24-hour sports news network that CNN had, that they created along in conjunction with Sports Illustrated, who was at that point, the major publication in the sports industry, and those two got together, and we had a who's who roster of anchors and even production folks that you saw on ESPN forever once the network shut down, or you see on other networks now all over the place. And it was a really cool idea, and we were competing at that point in time with ESPN News, which is still around and people probably know, but we did really cutting edge stuff, and we did 24 hours worth of news every day on sports, and had some live game action occasionally, and but mostly it was just do great news, do interesting pieces, do interesting packages, and every 30 minutes have a new show that kept people up to date all the time. And that network got shut down in 2002. Some mergers that happened around that time that may not have worked out great for the CNN brand, but everybody there still keeps in touch. It created a big network, and those days were awesome. But if you don't remember CNNSI, look it up. It was a legacy of the past, and how people got their sports news when there wasn't, internet or streaming or YouTube to go and get their instant access all the time.
How has it been watching the information of sports evolve to where it was to what you're doing now? I mean, you guys talked about it a little bit, going back to your high school days, it would have been impossible to predict what's coming. It'd be impossible for us to predict what's coming in 30 years from now. But, information in sports is really what it's all about, as far as, contextualizing it and learning about it. And how has that been, watching it grow from, simple broadcasting to now using data in this way?
I think it's awesome. I mean, look, I think that the more information folks have around sports, the better. And I think it's just an amazing capability that people have now to be able to get their information whenever they want it, and have more stuff on screen that contextualizes and frames the story of the event that they're watching. JJ, I'm sure Zack, you too maybe, but I can remember waiting up on the 11 p.m. Sports Center, because there's no other way to figure out who won that, the Lakers road game, or the Braves games, or the Pirates baseball games. You never knew. You had to wait up to see it. Or the next morning, you'd watch Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick on Sports Center in the morning that they replayed over and over again. But now you can get that information immediately. You can follow a game live, pitch by pitch, in these apps that are available. It's just a completely different way to enjoy the game. And those of us that are sports fans, I can't see any downside to having just more access to the game, to the information that's coming off of every single pitch, every single dribble of the basketball. That stuff can only make the game better. And I'll give you one piece that I think is interesting from the CNNSI days. And this is a little bit of where the genesis of the Pramana company came from. I can remember being there, and we had a guy who was involved in stats, and his job was to kind of look these things up. But the only thing he had at his disposal were almanacs, okay? So his name was Quags, and you'd go to Quags, and I remember him sitting over in the corner of the studio over by World Sport, and you go over and give him something that you wanted to look up because something happened in the game you were watching. There was a triple play in the third inning of the Cardinals game, and you wanted to know how many times that's happened and, all that stuff. And he would just write it down and say, I'll see if I can get to it. And it's comprehensive to go back and look these things up and try to find them. And sometimes you'd get an answer, and a lot of times it was just too much to go back and find these things. It just wasn't available. And so that always stuck with me, that maybe there was a way to make this automated and programmatic, And that was the kernel that was always in my mind saying, what if I could just ask my own questions and get that instant answer to be able to, put on broadcast? And that's kind of where the whole genesis of the company came from in my mind.
Well, let me ask you this. On a small scale, obviously, JJ and I deal with, data about high school sports, and we will go back and look at what's available online, but it stops at a certain point. I think 2006, 2007 is when things started getting put on Max Preps. And obviously you can go find analog historical data, or, maybe in newspapers and publications and stuff. But I imagine in professional sports, it's similar in the sense that some of that data stops at a certain point. And is it difficult to get a holistic view of these sports in the data when maybe some of that data is still on paper somewhere and hasn't been transcribed in a digital way, or maybe it has?
No, you hit the nail on the head, and it all depends on different data sources that you're looking for and when the records were actually kept. I mean, there are data gaps in every sport's long history. When mergers happened, some of the data wasn't moved. They didn't collect certain statistics like offensive rebounds past a certain date. And all that stuff is there are data boundaries there. So for sure, it doesn't just happen with high school type stuff or Max Preps. It happens with every major league's data. And they're trying so hard to fill in gaps at a certain level, whether it be an independent data company, whether it be the league, whether it be a third-party provider. All of them are looking to get those gaps filled. But sometimes, like you said, it is just the event occurred and there was a newspaper article about it, and they have to go back and try to manually input that in there. And, it's just a process, right? And so it happens. And what you have to do a lot of the times, and you'll see this when news is reported, or sometimes you'll see it on an article about a game. It'll say, they'll put a date there, since 1972. This is the first time this has happened since. And that's usually because they don't have a 100% accuracy before that of the data integrity of the stat they're looking for and referencing. So it is a problem, but it just depends on the data set you're looking at as to whether they have the full context of it, or whether you have to put a date parameter to make sure you're accurate.
Back to the CNN SI days, one of my biggest highlights in my sports fandom is calling in to Sports Tonight with Fred Hickman and getting my name on CNN and seeing, wow, there's my name on CNN. The whole world sees my name right now, asking a really dumb question.
Oh, Fred, he was great, man. He was great. Fred and Vince Cellini both did that Sports Tonight constantly, and then Fred went over to Sports Center and ESPN when the network shut down, and then Vince Cellini went to, I think, the Golf Network at that point. But Sports Tonight was the flagship, and it was on CNN at 11 o'clock. I mean, think of the prime real estate CNN proper gave to sports news, right? An 11 o'clock slot. No way in today's media environment they would give that up to a sports broadcast every 30 minutes. But that's what they did. And JJ was you were the precursor to to those that, on the call-in shows, to those that can just host their own podcast now, right?
That's
right.
Where
it all started. JJ's like, hey, I like talking about sports and having people listen to me.
And so where did you go?
Yeah, those days were great.
Where did you go from there, Corey? Was it the horse, or was it the horse racing, or was it Merv Griffin, which came immediately afterward?
Neither.
Oh.
So, this is an arc, apparently. I'm not sure. So after CNN SI shut down, I actually moved to Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, and was the strength and conditioning coach for the UNCW Seahawks, which is a different arc, right? Along with Jim Mayu, I was his assistant, and we trained a ton of athletes over the course of that year and a half. And put a lot of them in the NCAAs. That was back during the time when, the Brett Blizzard's teams would get to the NCAA and, win a game or two. And it was a really interesting kind of arc to get my CSCS and do all that work and train athletes at the highest level. And that was about a year and a half. And that was before the Merv Griffin experience and the horse racing and stuff. But there was your fill in the gap there on that, Jake.
Oh, okay. And then which one, Merv or horse?
Well, Merv is where horse began. So let's go with this one. And we don't need to talk a long time about this.
No.
Yeah, I decided I was going to be ridiculously unrealistic and jump in my Jeep Wrangler and drive from Wrightsville Beach to Los Angeles to try to be a private chef. Yeah, there's another arc. But I got out to California. Long story short, ended up becoming a private chef for Merv Griffin within a couple of months. Moved out to La Quinta in the Palm Springs area in the desert.
Zack's face right now.
I just don't understand. You went to school for journalism,
yeah.
man. I don't.
Zack is like, what is happening?
I mean, did you also go to flight school? I don't. What's happening here?
That came later, Zack. No, not at all. No, yeah. So yeah, it was Merv Griffin's chef for the next 5 years.
And for the kids out there, Merv Griffin created Jeopardy. He created Wheel of Fortune. He is the media mogul of all media moguls.
Oh, see, I didn't even know that.
Oh,
there you
yeah.
go.
Yeah.
I just heard Private Chef and thought, my God, what is it? Just all over the place.
No, Zack is much younger than us, Corey, so he doesn't know a lot of people. So yeah, Merv Griffin is he was the man, capital THE, capital MAN.
Oh God, the guy was a billionaire legend on talk shows. I mean, if anybody who's everybody went on the Merv Griffin show for 30 years, and he was just a legend. And I talk to anybody that's JJ or my age or older. We're not going to date ourselves, JJ, but they definitely know Merv Griffin, the Merv Griffin show, Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah.
He was a singer first. I mean, the guy had a #1 hit way back in the day. Like he's done a little bit of everything. Owned real estate, owned Paradise Island in the Bahamas. Owned the piece of land in Atlantic City. Sold the Taj Mahal to Trump back in the day. Like he's done a little bit of everything in his life, right? And then he was a billionaire that at that point was still creating game shows well into his 80s.
Yeah. Like Corey said, he had a talk show for like 25 years. Any show you watched on TV, at the end of it, pretty much said a Merv Griffin production or a Merv Griffin entertainment thing.
Yeah.
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 So all of our friends that we grew up with, Corey's, were like, what's Corey up to these days? Oh, he's a private chef for Merv Griffin. That was so bizarre and still is to this day.
Well, I mean, there's not a long history of private chefs for Merv Griffin out of East Carteret High School. I'm one of one in that sector, if you will. But
you got that nailed down.
Even of our age, not only did you see him on all the game shows, and at the end of all those, you saw him on that Seinfeld episode where Kramer had the Merv Griffin set in his living room. I mean, remember, he crossed all the different kind of the pop culture at that point in time as well. And I even asked him about that, and he was like, "Yeah, Seinfeld was a kind of a friend of his. Of course he was." And he said they were thinking of doing this show, and Larry David kind of approached him and said, "Do you have any of the old Merv Griffin set pieces lying around?" And he asked his assistant, and he said, "Yeah, we got some out on the ranch in one of the garages," and that's where the set came from to do the Seinfeld episode. But it was an interesting experience. We had about a 240-acre ranch out in La Quinta in the desert, and had a full 5/8 of a mile horse race track on it, and 35 to 40 thoroughbreds at all time, and it was kind of a surreal experience, right, to live out there, and
no doubt.
kind of your job was to cook for Merv and his celebrity buddies, so kind of a surreal thing. But that's where the horse thing crossed over, because that's where I got into horse racing. Living and breathing it every day.
Just like so much of your existence, a lot of connections and networking and stuff, and you kind of started to get into horse racing, right?
Yeah, because, Merv at that point in time actually owned a horse called, and he named all his own horses, Stevie Wonderboy, who won the actual Breeders' Cup Juvenile while I was out there. And, it was just great to see all of the actual daily things that go into having a world champion horse either on your property or at the track. And I got really kind of convinced that this was an interesting puzzle to try to solve, because there were so many different areas of the industry that I was kind of drawn to, and that's where it came from. And started owning horses with syndicates while I was still out on the ranch living with and cooking for Merv and his celebrities, and it started kind of get into my head that maybe we can do this. And I started a kind of a horse racing syndicate with his ranch manager and horse manager, and kind of got into the game there, and that's where that whole thing took off. And so once Merv passed, that's what I did full time for a while.
And Corey said, the connections he was making at whether it's Saffron or Intel or now Pramana Labs, out on the golf course, and talking to potential customers and clients. And I'm sure a Merv Griffin story comes out from time to time.
Yeah, a few of them come out. There's a bunch of them. Since you're journalists, I'll give you one, and I'll give you a couple, but. Since you're journalist, you'll get this one. While I was out there working for Merv, I was still actually doing the sports reporting for a magazine called Unleashed, and had some really good, interesting interviews with big athletes they'd set me up with, one of which was going to be a phoner with Deion Sanders. And, Merv knew everybody. He wasn't huge and didn't know a ton of sports and sports celebrities. But and of course, those are the days of landlines. And I went to the store to get food, which I seem to do all the time. And I got back, and Merv kind of walked into the kitchen. He goes, "You got a phone call while I was gone, while you were gone?" I said, "Well, who was it?" He goes, some guy named Deion Sanders. And I said, did he leave a number? He said, no, he said he'd call you back. And I said, okay, thanks, Merv. We never actually got that photo to connect, but I just thought it was hilarious that he wasn't like, hey, Deion called you.
Yeah, prime time.
Yeah, prime time. At that point, he was selling that hot dog cooker, and it was kind of an interesting time for Deion before being the hottest coach in the world in college football right now. But, yeah, it was fun.
Man.
Yeah, but Merv was an interesting guy. Like, he had this knack of just kind of being a talk show host. You could never catch him with a comment. You could never surprise him. He always had a comeback and whatever he wanted. You just never surprised the guy. He also you never knew who was going to show up every night for dinner, and he'd give you a kind of heads up at the 30 minutes, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria are going to be here. That type of stuff seems absolutely absurd, but that's what would happen, right? And I would kind of get caught off guard, or I'd, have to figure out what I was going to do, and I just adjusted. It was just me. I was the only chef. And so when these folks came, they had to cook for me, to do whatever. And when I first got the job, I just decided, okay, everything has to look like an artwork or a creation on the plate, because if it looks good, it tastes better, was my thought. And all of it was good food, right? But I can remember him about 3 months in calling me into the living room, and I just said, what's going on, Merv? And he goes, can I ask you a question? And I thought I was in trouble, and he goes, do you know how to make a casserole? And I said, do I know how to make a casserole? Why? He goes, and this is Merv's language. He said, when the guests are here, put the tits on. But when it's just me, I'd love to have a tuna noodle casserole. I said, all right, Merv, fine. I hear you. Let's go. So he was a very, very, very casual, nice guy that was an awesome guy to work for. But again, you never knew whether you were cooking for Merv with a casserole or whether you were making a 3-course meal for the Schwarzeneggers. It's just kind of the way the world worked at that point.
People are listening to this episode right now and be like, man, y'all buried the lead. Well, you should have led off with
I
Merv.
was literally thinking that exact phrase in my head just now. That there are people that we know who are listening to this right now who are going, oh my God, Oh man, what an exciting! You don't seem like a guy that sits still very easily, Corey.
Yeah, I think that's the coffee.
Yeah,
but no, I don't. Look, there's always a new challenge. If you were to look at my resume, and you're a recruiter, you would say none of this makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know where to put you here.
I like to look at it though that there's always a new challenge and something else that I want to do, and why not me? And that's always been the philosophy. Why not? I want to do it. Why can't I? And so that's just the reason it looks like this, and the reason that I am kind of doing what I'm doing now. And again, that all had to culminate in why couldn't I start a tech company, right?
Corey, man, thank you for your time. Thank you for showing us that there are East Carteret success stories out there in the world, and we appreciate it.
Well, anytime, JJ, and great to talk with you today, Zack. And hopefully we can talk again at some point soon.
Maybe we'll talk some horse racing and some sports betting sometime in the future.
We didn't even get into sports betting today, but anytime you want to talk that, let's set up another pod.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.